Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training, we're going to be talking about playing the game of numbers specifically for paid traffic. Now, this training really is the crux of understanding how paid traffic works, because if you can understand what it is that we're going to be talking about in this training here, literally this is going to unveil the curtain of what paid traffic is and how you can be successful with it. So the very first thing to understand is that whenever you're playing any game, it's very important to understand the rules of the game, because at the end of the day, if you don't actually understand what the rules of the game that you are playing are, there's literally no way that you can even accidentally win. Like if you end up on a basketball court and you don't know what the game is, you don't know what the rules of the game are, there's literally no way that you're going to be able to actually even play. That's number one. Then number two, if the referee calls you out and you're like, oh man, I got kicked out of the game, I'm so upset, the truth is that you didn't even know what in the world you were doing when you were playing the game, so you had no right to actually be playing the game. And so that's exactly why we're going to be unveiling that in this training here today, so that way you can understand exactly how to play the game of paid traffic. Okay, so we talked about how this training will show you how the game is played. And like I said earlier, if you truly understand what it is that we talk about in this training, the floodgates of unlimited leads forever will open for you. Yes, I said that. If you understand what it is that we're talking about in this training, right? And obviously in the entire module section related to paid traffic, but this video specifically, if you truly can wrap your head around what it is that we're going to be talking about, you and your business will be able to benefit from unlimited leads forever. And that's why this is so absolutely critical, okay? Because here is the bottom line fact. Paid traffic is 100% a scientific game of numbers, period. And this is exactly why I want to kind of walk you guys through an example, because I understand that some of these concepts for most of the people and for most people who are out there trying to understand paid traffic, in the beginning, it is a little bit challenging to wrap your head around it. And this is exactly why it's going to be important to stick around and really watch this video multiple times so you can understand what it is that we're talking about. So let's go ahead and walk through an example of a funnel that is called a scheduler funnel, okay? So in this example, the very first step of this example is going to be where you have the Facebook ad, right? And here is an example of a Facebook ad. The second part of this entire choreography that is happening, that leads are going through, is you have a funnel, right? And the funnel is going to have a landing page. And here's an example of a landing page from a scheduler funnel, okay? Now, I want to emphasize here, if you don't understand what most of these specific parts are, don't worry. We have specific training on how to make this for yourself. I just want you to stick around with me and understand the overall gist of what it is that we're talking about, is that, hey, there's something called a Facebook ad. I'll talk to you more about in other trainings, how to make it and all that kind of stuff. There's something called a landing page. Again, I'll talk to you more about all of how to make it and stuff, but just stick around with me and understand the gist of what it is that I'm saying, okay? So the second part is where you have a landing page. The third part of this is where you have something called a thank you page scheduler, okay? So it's basically where somebody would opt in, put in their information, and then on the next page, there would be a scheduler where the person could go ahead and schedule an appointment, okay? So this is just an example of this specific funnel. The next step of this entire process would be where the person who scheduled the call would show up on your Google Calendar. So you can see here all the oranges and the greens are calls that have been scheduled. Okay, so then the next part of this is obviously they're going to show up for the call. So the call shows, right? You pick up the call and you actually have the sales call with the prospect. And then finally, the last step of this entire process is that the person becomes a customer. And so that is how they go from an ad to landing page to thank you scheduler to call schedule to show schedule to customer. Okay, now this is just an example. Now, what's going to happen here is that what we call, when you actually first go ahead and put your ad onto Facebook, that is what we call impressions. Okay, impressions are when you are having eyeballs looking at your actual Facebook ad inside of the newsfeed. Okay, that is what we call impressions. Now, when somebody clicks on your ad, when they see it, that is what we call clicks. Surprise, surprise, right? Like shocking. So you have impressions and then we have clicks. Now, once you have clicks, after somebody actually opts in, right? Opts in is what we call about actually putting somebody's information in there. The next step of this entire quote unquote sales choreography or this entire lead flow is where you now have a lead. Okay, so you had an impression, which was the eyeballs. Then when somebody actually clicked on it, you now have clicks. When somebody actually fills in their information on the landing page, you now have a lead. And then the next part of this is that, okay, when somebody actually schedules, you now have a call that is scheduled that shows up on your Google Calendar, right? Then the next step of this is, okay, now you have somebody that shows up to the call that's called showed. And then finally, in the last part is you now have customers. Okay, so that's all of the phases lined up with the parts of the sales choreography. So impressions, clicks, leads, call schedules, call showed, and customers. Okay, so let's go ahead and put some numbers to this so you can understand exactly what it is that we are talking about. So let's say hypothetically, just an example, let's go ahead and say that you get 20,000 impressions because you pay Facebook to give you 20,000 impressions. That's how it works. And we're going to talk about the specifics of what that's called in a little bit at the end of this training. But let's say you pay Facebook for 20,000 eyeballs, okay? 20,000 eyeballs. And let's say, for example, that your ad, based on, the picture, based on the text, based on that kind of stuff, let's say that you have 1% of people, let's say you have 1% of people who see your ad actually click on your ad, okay? So if you have 1% of people, 1% of 20,000 is going to be 200. So now you have had 200 clicks onto your ad. Make sense so far? Cool. Then the next part is, okay, now those people who clicked on your ad are on your landing page, right? Let's say out of that, you have 20% of that 200, right? You have 20% of that 200. Let's say those 20% of that actually fill in and opt into your landing page. So therefore, you now have 40 leads because 20% of 200 is 40. Okay, makes sense so far? So stick with me. I know we're getting a little bit into numbers, but just take it step by step and it will make 100% to you as you walk along with me, okay? So let's say, for example, you now have 40 leads who have actually given you their information, and now they are actually at the part of being on the thank you page scheduler. What's going to happen now is, let's say, for example, 50% of those people who land on the thank you page scheduler, let's say 50% of them actually go ahead and schedule an appointment. Okay, let's just say hypothetically, 50% of the people who land on this page go ahead and schedule an appointment based on the calendar that you had there. So therefore, you now have 20 calls scheduled. Makes sense, right? 50% of 40 is going to be 20 calls scheduled, okay? So now you have 20 calls scheduled that are showing up on your Google Calendar. And then out of that, let's say, for example, you have 50% of those people actually show up to the call. The other 50%, right, you had 20 calls scheduled. Let's say 10 people show up. The other 10 people, they just ghosted you, they didn't show up, whatever that might have been. So you actually have 10 people who actually picked up the phone when you called them for their sales appointment, okay? Then, let's say out of those 10, you closed 30% of those into a paying customer, okay? So let's say you closed 30% of those into a paying customer. So now as a result, you now have 3 paying customers. So you can see here, 20,000, 1% of that, 200 clicks, led to 40 leads. 40 leads led to 20 calls scheduled. 20 calls scheduled led to 10 calls showed. 10 calls showed led to 30 customers. Okay, so this is what we call the playing the game of numbers, right? We have here, as you put money in to pay for impressions, you have these percentages that basically will say, okay, how does this entire thing break down over the course of the entire sales funnel, right? So you have a normal marketing funnel, which is this, but then this entire thing together is what we call a sales funnel. Now, you might be asking, did we just randomly come up with these numbers? Like, what if these numbers are wrong, right? And that's a very good question, my friend, because this is what we call KPIs and benchmarks. And here's the cool thing is, lucky for you, literally hundreds and thousands of people have ran similar funnels with thousands and thousands and thousands of leads in order to be able to determine what is the range of acceptable KPIs and benchmarks. And so I'm going to show you more in a second about this, but I just want you to know for now is that if your actual numbers, right, let's say, for example, you get 20,000 impressions and you don't get 1% people who click on it, you get like 0.4%. Then that is what we call when your benchmark and KPIs are out of range, right? They're out of KPI. When something is out of KPI, that just means that you need to improve something. So in the case of the ad, if your benchmark is, let's say the benchmark is 1%. If you're getting less than 1% click-through, right, people are not less than 1% clicking on it, in that case, that means that you might have to change your image and you might have to change your text. Let's say you're getting less than 20% of people who are giving your information here. That might mean that you might need to put and spruce up the page over here. Let's say you're getting less than 50% of people scheduling your call over here. That means you might have to fix the page over here. Let's say you're getting less than 50% of people showing up to the call. That means you might have to send more reminders. You might have to remind them a little bit more, send them a video message, that kind of stuff. Let's say, for example, you're closing less than 30% of people who show up on the call. That means that you need to be doing more sales training. You need to listen to your call recordings. You need to record, make sure you're recording them, all that kind of stuff, right? And so this is what we call KPIs and benchmarks. And so basically you understand based on the benchmarks and the KPIs if something needs to be improved, because if it's outside of the acceptable range, that means that you need to improve it by taking one of the steps, right? In the case of the ad, you might have to change the picture in the landing thing. You might have to change the picture in the text. In the course of the landing page, you might have to change the text on the landing page. If the show up rate is, if this right here percentage is low, then you might have to send more reminders. If the closing percentage is low, that means you might have to actually do more sales training for yourself so you can be a better salesperson. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that all of this is scientific and it's not random. And so if something is out of quote unquote KPI, right? Because we know the KPIs, I'm going to show you what the KPIs are here in a second. If something is outside of KPI, because we've already tested this for you guys, that means that you just need to identify the bottleneck and you need to basically fix it. Because the further up the bottleneck is, right? So if you're right here, if this percentage is low, that means it's going to affect all of the other percentages down here, right? Like if you're lower than 20% for the people who are opting in on your landing page, then obviously you're not going to get the same, even if this is 70% and 60% and 30%, you might not get the same flow that's coming in here, right? But let's say this is low, but then all of a sudden you have a high one here. In that case, you might be okay. So there's a whole game that you can play, but the point being is that it's scientific and it is not random. And so that's what I wanted to go ahead and emphasize for this section of this training right here, is that we didn't just randomly come up with these numbers. It's not like, oh, what if these numbers are wrong? What is our margin of error? It's all scientific because we can look at our KPIs and determine if this number is inside of KPI or not. I hope that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, make sure you take a second to pause this video, go back and listen to that again, because it's very important what I just talked about in terms of KPIs and benchmarks. It's very important to actually understand what we just talked about, okay? The next part of this training that I want to dive into is I want to show you how the benchmarks and KPIs will change depending on the type of funnel that you are running. So remember we talked about this over here. So you have this is a scheduler funnel, meaning there's a landing page and a thank you page, okay? So there's different types of funnels, right? And so this is a spreadsheet. Do not get overwhelmed with me. Stick with me here for a second. I know some people who are watching this training, some of our students, some of our clients, when you guys see numbers, when you guys see spreadsheets, you guys have an aneurysm and you just kind of like really, really freak out. I want you to stick with me because I'm going to break it down, and the more exposure and the more repetition you get with this, the better you're going to get. I promise you, if you're not good at numbers, it just means that you haven't actually sat with it to learn about it. In the same way, when you all learn how to drive a car, whenever you learn how to swim, whenever you did your first sales call, whenever you did all of that for the first time, it was difficult. So same thing with numbers. If you just stick with me, I promise it will make sense. And so just take it step by step, okay? So what I want to show you guys here is that there are different numbers depending on the different type of funnel that you are running. So this is an example here. This is a scheduler funnel. This is what the numbers would look like, right? This is a VSL funnel here. This is a Facebook group funnel. There's different numbers for different types of funnels that you would run. So as a hypothetical, let's say, for example, this month I wanted to get, let's say, 25 customers, okay? And let's say right here, all I got to do in this spreadsheet that I have, and I'll put it in the resources section so you guys can see how this works, is all I would have to do is I would go ahead and input maybe what my numbers are, right? And I just went ahead and put in the KPI numbers right here in the yellow. I would go ahead and put my average CPM as well, and I'll talk to you more about what all that is here in a second. And then I would go ahead and just input how many customers I want, and what is my average LTV for that customer, or my front-end cash, whatever that might be, okay? If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. Just stick with me in the example here. So if I wanted 25 customers, that means at an average call closing percentage, right, how many people actually closed on the call, I need to have 83 people actually show up to the call. Well, if I need 83 people to show up to the call, and let's say I only get about 50% of them to show up, that means I actually have to get 167 people scheduled. Now, if I get 167 people scheduled, I actually have to get 333 leads, because I know that only 50% of all the leads I get actually schedule a call. And then if I have 333 leads, I need to get 1,667 clicks, because I know that my landing page converts at this percentage. And then if I need to get 1,667 clicks, I know that this is how many impressions I need to get. So let's walk it back forward now. I get 166,000 impressions. At a 1% click-through rate, I get 1,667 clicks. At a 20% opt-in rate, I get 333 leads. At a 50% schedule rate, I get 167 calls scheduled. At a 50% show rate, I get 83 calls show. At a 30% call closing percentage, I get 25 customers. Okay, and then it will tell me here I spent $2,500 in ad spend based on the CPM, which is cost per 1,000 eyeballs. Based on that, I spent 2,500 CPM. And I made $25,000 in revenue because my LTV on average is $1,000 or whatever my front end cash is. Okay, so what that means is that basically I put into the machine $2,500 and I got out of the machine $25,000. That's a pretty good return, right? It's like, okay, if you give me $2.50, I'll give you $25 back. That's a pretty good return. And so you can see here that your gross profit, revenue minus ad spend, would be 22,500, and that your return on ad spend, right, how much money you made from your investment of 2,500 will be 900%. Just for context, just so you can understand how this paid traffic game is played, the stock market as an investment vehicle returns 12% year after year on average. 12% year after year on average is what the stock market returns. This funnel that we just gave you, I gave you an example of, returned 900%. This is what I'm trying to explain to you guys, is that the game of paid traffic is literally like you're playing with Monopoly money if you can understand how it actually works and if you can actually understand what the numbers mean and what all of that looks like, okay? Now, like I said, this is a scheduler funnel. There are a whole bunch of different metrics in terms of the VSL funnel. You don't have to know what these specific funnels are. There's going to be separate training for that to explain what these funnels are, but I just wanted to kind of show you guys that the metrics will change, but the point is that you put $1 in and you get $2 back out. That is how the paid traffic game is played. If you put $1 in and you get $2 back out, right? Or in this case, right? In this case, you put $1 in and you got $9 back out. My question to you is, how much money should you put into that machine? The answer to that question is all the dang money that you can find. Because that means that you're putting $1 in and you're getting $9 back out. You keep doing that over and over and over and over and over again. And that, my friends, is how you get the income, the impact, and the freedom that you want as an entrepreneur if you can understand the paid traffic game. Now, there's going to be a whole separate training about how you should actually be using paid and organic together. That's not my point here. I just wanted to show you the power of paid traffic, and then especially when it's compounded with organic, that's going to be a whole separate training that we make, okay? That is the example that I wanted to show there. The next part that I want to go into here is at the bottom of the sheet. Again, do not get overwhelmed. Don't have an aneurysm. Don't have a heart attack. Stick with me here for a second. This right here is the cheat sheet for all of the benchmarks and KPIs. So right here, you can see here the conversion name. So on the left side is, let's say, for example, impressions. What does it mean, impressions? What's the definition of an impression? I've gone ahead and wrote down for you what is an impression. So if you ever forget it, you can come back to this cheat sheet. Now, I want you to know that you do not have to memorize all of this stuff. You will automatically start to get an idea of what these numbers and all this kind of stuff means the more you do it. The point of this video is to just open your mind that all of this exists. And then the more you get exposure to it in the rest of the training, as you set it up, as you do your own analysis of this kind of stuff, it's going to become more and more familiar to you. And that way you will be able to understand it better and better and better, okay? So like you said here, impressions, right here is definition of what it is. Right here, click-through rate, the definition of what it is, how to actually calculate it. So click-through rate is basically takes the clicks divided by the impressions. And so I've gone ahead and this is the cheat sheet for all of the numbers, for all of the metrics that you would ever need for paid traffic, period. This is what it is with the name, with the definition, and with how to calculate it. And then over here, this is the actual acceptable range of benchmarks according to the different type of funnel that you might run. Here's an example of a VSL funnel, a scheduler funnel, a Facebook group funnel. I've gone ahead and included the different benchmarks for all of the different types of conversion rates that are existing here, okay? I just want you to know also, this is not all of the funnels that exist. There's many different types of funnels. I've only included examples of 3 types of funnels here, okay? So that is the cheat sheet that I wanted to go ahead and show you. And again, that will be in the resources section below. So you can reference this for the lifetime of your entire business. Whenever you're running paid traffic, you're like, I totally forgot what CPM means. What was it that Yasin said that CPM means? All you got to do is, boom, CPM means cost per 1,000 impressions. It's how much it costs you in ad spend for each 1,000 eyeballs. And M equals milli equals thousands in Latin. Boom. See? Now you know what CPM means. See, easy as that. And like I said, you'll get more familiar with this as you go along here. And then here are the benchmarks and the KPIs. So that way you know, okay, if my CPM is more than $20, I might be out of KPI and I might need to change things. And that'll be a whole separate training to understand how to change things from there. Awesome. I hope you're still sticking around with me because that was what I wanted to talk to you regarding that. And that is how we talked about in terms of the benchmarks will change depending on the funnel. So if you spend X and if you are within KPI, then you will get Y customers out of it. That's how you know how to play the game of numbers with paid traffic. Now, the other thing I want to go ahead and point out here is that this is why it's called the game of numbers. Because if you do not have enough volume, then you will not have customers at the end. So let me give you an example. Let's say you only have 3,333 impressions. That will make 33 clicks, 7 leads, 3 calls scheduled, 2 calls show, and you'll have 0.6 of a customer. I'm not sure about you, but I've never had 0.6 of a customer. That means that you don't make any money if you have 0.6 of a customer. 0.6 of a customer is not even 1. That means you haven't had one person pay you yet, right? Because it's a game of numbers. And so with these percentages, 3,333 impressions with this specific funnel would not be enough to be able to create even one customer. And so you might spend $30, $40, $50 inside of ad spend, and you'd be like, oh, what's going on? I'm not getting a customer. What's happening over here? I only want to spend a little bit amount of money. I don't want to put too much money into this. That's why it's important to understand that it's a game of numbers, and it requires volume and it requires reps in order to be able to analyze and understand what the numbers are telling you. So I just wanted to make that note here as well. Okay, the last thing about this, like I said here, all of these numbers over here, do not get overwhelmed with this cheat sheet. It is just a reference when you forget what something is. You do not need to memorize or remember all of them. You will get it over time with all of the reps. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here regarding these benchmarks is that if you remember all of those benchmarks from our example, they all have a name to them. Okay, so that percentage in terms of the impressions to clicks is called click-through rate. What your landing page converts at, it's called landing page conversion rate. What your schedule percentage is just called schedule percentage. How many people show up to the call is called show up rate. What your how many people you close on the sales call is called call closing percentage. And all of those are referenced inside here. So you can see here, call closing percentage, show up rate, schedule percentage with their definition, all of that inside of the cheat sheet, which you can reference. So I just wanted to go ahead and make that note there as well, okay? And so you can see here that the game of numbers with paid traffic is 100% predictable with numbers. The numbers will tell a story of what is going on and where the problem lies in the pipeline, okay? Now, the last thing before we close out this training is I want to go ahead and talk about the mindset of running paid traffic, okay? Because I want to make it very, very, very blatantly clear here. Facebook ads are no place for creative, artistic, or emotional thinking. It's literally numbers and math. People who know their numbers take all, and people who ignore their numbers will lose the house. Okay? And so it will require for you to put on a different hat. This is not a kind of game that you can play when your head is all over the place, when you're running around like a headless chicken, when you're juggling the baby, when you're on social media, when you got like people bothering you all the time. That's not the place to be doing the mindset of Facebook ads from. You have to be in a different state, okay? And that requires for you to really put on a different hat to be in that state of mind. And like I said earlier, if you are not a numbers or a math person, that's perfectly fine. Stick with it. Okay? Nobody's a numbers or math person per se. It's just the amount of exposure that you have to it and the amount of exposure, how much you get used to the kind of stuff. Okay? And it's just literally addition and subtraction and basic fractions. It's not like you're doing calculus here. And so just stick with it, follow the training, go step by step. And this is why this training was so important, is because that's what we talked about here, was revealing how the game is played, playing the game of numbers, of paid traffic. And so I think that this is going to allow you to just absolutely crush it with the paid traffic game. That is what we wanted to talk about in this training. With that, I will catch you guys on the next training.